following team, we are mindful to ascertain if there is any reason that we cannot share information fully as it relates to Russia. So she would say, President Obama wants to make sure that we can be open with them about our discussion about Russia.
Well, as you said, this memo is written on January 20th. Now, people are talking about a meeting on January 5th, but they are not.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here with us tonight. This is our second class called Judaism at Home from the JLI. And thank you for being here. Hope everyone has had a good week so far. As I was getting on the Zoom tonight, I was reminded that so many of us are getting used to learning on Zoom, and especially a lot of the kids. All my kids are doing it now all day. But there has been a group of children, and a particular group of children that have been learning on Zoom for about 10 years now, or maybe a little bit more, maybe 10, 12 years on technology like Zoom. And these are kids of Chabad rabbis and rebbetzins in remote places around the world that don't have Jewish schools. And for many, many years, what they've been doing for schooling is connecting with other kids and teachers from their region, their part of the world, their time zone or approximate time zone, and have been studying and having school called Chabad Online School, and been doing this for many, many years. So I was speaking to one of the teachers there, and he was chuckling as he was saying, "Welcome to our world. We've been doing this for a long time, and this is how we teach these kids, whether it's from Asia, Africa, different remote places where they don't have local Jewish schools." Okay, just a side note. So we are ready for the second class. Last week, if you remember, we discussed about prayer, waking up in the morning, and some of the prayers we do in the morning. It was about the whole process of waking up in the morning. We're following, so to speak, the day chronologically, and we began with awakening. The whole approach Judaism has to being to waking up in the morning. If you remember, one of the central themes last week was the concept that waking up in the morning should be done from the perspective that my day has meaning. I'm here for a purpose. I'm not just waking up by accident. God has made a choice. He's put me here today because today I have a sacred mission. I have a purpose. I can do something. I can be meaningful. I can make a difference. And with that in mind, that should inspire us to wake up and to say, wow, I've got this gift. I've got another day. I want to get up. And that was kind of sets the tone for the day. We spoke about the Noda Ani prayer and some of the morning traditions as we spoke about last week. This week, we're going to talk about another aspect of Judaism at home, and that is something that we've become all very familiar with over the last few months, or at least some of us have, which is food, eating. There's a lot of jokes out there about the amount of eating people are doing at home. People are spending a lot of time at home. Some of the memes that I've seen is that someone was complaining that the buttons on their jeans are practicing social distancing. Someone sent me one here. It's interesting. They wrote, "I'm giving up chocolate for a month." And then he writes, "Sorry, bad punctuation. I'm giving up eating chocolate for a month." So lots of things, but yes, people have been eating maybe a little bit more. And Judaism has a lot to say about food. Jewish people have a very interesting relationship with food. It's very central to our tradition. And anyone who's, of course, attended a Jewish function can attest to that. Never get between a Jew and his food and his plate. I'm reminded about the old Jewish woman staying in a hotel, and she calls the reception desk and she says, "I'd like to order some orange juice with the pits inside. I want the pits inside the orange juice, and I want my toast burnt." So the hotel receptionist says, "I'm sorry, ma'am, we can't do that for you. That's not how we do it." She says, "Why not? You did it yesterday." So a lot of good humor about food and Jewish people and food. So we're going to talk a lot about what Judaism has to say about food. The question is, why would Judaism want to have any say about food. Seemingly food is a mundane activity that we're involved with. Judaism is about spirituality, but as we began to allude to last week, Judaism does get involved and does have a say about all matters of life. First and foremost, as we said last time, because the purpose of Judaism is not to escape the material to be spiritual, but to bring the spiritual into the mundane, to bring heaven down to earth, to infuse our mundane activities with meaning, purpose, and spirituality. So yes, there's Judaism on getting dressed, as we spoke about last week. Judaism on waking up. There's Judaism and Jewish teachings on sleeping, on every aspect of our mundane life. They should be infused. We're trying to elevate it. Also, when it comes to eating, the rules and rituals of Judaism surround eating have an impact on us as far as refining us as human beings, because it does introduce a lot of self-discipline. It's an area of life, as many of us know, it's not so easy to be disciplined about. Many people struggle with all sorts of with overeating, not eating healthy enough, and obesity, and so many other different things. It's something that we struggle a lot with in our country, in our society, and rituals, rules, and regulations, so to speak, create a certain environment of self-discipline. So there's the way it refines us as people. And finally, Judaism is about a relationship with God. And when you're in a relationship, a healthy relationship is such where it's all consuming in the sense that especially when we have a relationship with God, that there is no dichotomy. There isn't, in these matters, I am a godly person, and in these matters, I'm not. It's all pervasive. It's part of, it permeates every aspect of our life. So yes, Judaism does talk about eating, and we're going to talk about that today. What some of the things that Judaism says about eating, and of course, this is Judaism at home, because we do a lot of eating at home, and so we want to know, what does Judaism have to say? Now, I want to explain why we're doing this. If the course is supposed to be in chronological order, why are we discussing eating next? If you look in Jewish Code of Law, it generally says in the morning before you eat breakfast, you should do your prayers. Now, we did mention some of the morning blessings last week, but the shacharit, which is the morning prayers, we have not discussed yet. And so the question is, why are we talking about eating food before we're talking about the prayers? And the answer to that is that though generally before we sit down to a real breakfast, a real meal, we do our prayers, but it is Chabad custom, interestingly enough, it is a specific Chabad custom to specifically have a snack, and it could be a healthy snack, whatever kind of snack you want, a drink, a snack before we pray. So even though in the Jewish Code of Law it says pray first, then eat, in Chabad custom, we eat a little first, then we pray. And the reason for that is, and the logic for that is because if you don't eat anything before you pray, guess what you're thinking about while you're praying, the whole time you're praying? You're thinking about, when am I going to eat? When am I going to drink something? Like what most people think about on Yom Kippur. When is this fast over? They're looking at their watch. How many more minutes is there to the fast, right? Spend a lot of time thinking, all right, it's ironic, but Yom Kippur, it's the day we think about food probably more than any other day of the year. So if we had a situation where we said no food or drink at all before you pray, we would pray every day thinking about, okay, what am I going to eat after this? So Chabad custom is not to have a meal, because that would not be appropriate, but to have a snack. It could be a fruit, it could be a little cookie, it could be your coffee, orange juice, whatever your snack of choice in the morning, something light, but just enough that you're satiated to the point where you can pray with a clear mind. So that is Chabad custom, and the expression is, it's better to eat in order to pray than to pray in order to eat. Okay, that's the concept. It's better that we pray in order to eat rather than the other way around. So we want our minds to be clear when we do pray on the prayer, not so much on the food. So therefore, chronologically, after we've woken up in the morning, and remember I said there was a ritual, there's the Moja Ani that we say. There's the ritual washing of the hands, setting the tone that we're here to serve. And there's some morning blessings that we read. The next thing we might do in the morning is have a little snack, a drink, a coffee, a tea, a water, a fruit, whatever it is, the snack of choice. Judaism doesn't tell you what the snack should be. It does say be healthy, so better a healthy snack if possible. And so that's why we're talking about this now, rather than waiting for other things. Okay, One other thing that we need to do before we eat, we did mention morning blessings last week. We mentioned the washing your hands. There is another thing we're supposed to do in the morning before we eat. And that is, before we eat in the morning, we're supposed to make sure to feed our pets. Definitely before you have breakfast, but some say even before you have a snack. Any food, you should feed your pets first. That is a dog, cat, birds, fish, any pet that you have. Of course, unless it's not their time to eat, or they're not hungry for some, or it's, not appropriate for them to eat at that point in time. But we have to make sure that their food needs are taken care of before we eat anything. So again, just before we open the fridge and before we go and eat something, we do want to make sure that our pets are fed. This is mentioned, interestingly enough, in the Jewish code of law. It mentions that this is from the Shema. And if you look in the Shema, it says there, your animals shall eat, and then it talks about us eating. When God blesses us, it says you'll have plenty of grain and you'll have plenty of produce, and your animals will eat, and then it mentions that we will eat. And we say that this is an allusion to the idea that we have to make sure that our pets eat first. This is, interestingly enough, the idea that maybe a snack would be okay to have before you give your coffee might be okay, is alluded to in the Torah, because if you look in the Torah, and it tells the story of Rebecca, and Rebecca brings water for the camels of Eliezer. So first she gives Eliezer to drink some water, then she gives the camels to drink. So some people say, you can see from here, that it's okay to have a little snack, some water before you feed your pets, but definitely not a meal. So again, one thing you want to do in the morning, Jewish law, again, we're talking about Judaism at home, is before you have some food, take care of your pets first. Of course, if it's appropriate, if it's their time to eat, and so on and so forth. What are the reasons for this? First and foremost, it's about being humane. It's about being kind and sensitive to the needs of your animal. You have the ability to walk over to the fridge anytime. Unfortunately, we have too much of the ability and the freedom to do so. But we can go to the fridge anytime and pop our head in there. There was a meme going around where someone was asking if anyone else was getting a tan from the light in their fridge. But you're right, you have access to it all the time, but your pets do not. They are depending on you. So if they're hungry and they see you eating, it's painful to them. It's uncomfortable to them. So it's about learning compassion. And Judaism, again, this is Judaism 3,000 years ago, talking about the need to be compassionate to animals, way ahead of its time, because that's something that even in our society is only in recent decades have we become much more sensitive to that need to be compassionate to animals as a whole, as a society. And thank God today we have laws in place to protect animals, which is what Judaism says is a law, that you have to feed your animal first. Interesting, in the Talmud it says, based on a verse of Tehillim, that some people who are not deserving to be blessed in life, God blesses them in the merit of their animals, in the merit of their pets. Because their pets are worthy, they receive blessing in the merits of their pets, which I've never come across before. It's the first time when I was preparing this class I came across this. And therefore, to thank your pet for the fact that maybe God's being nice to you because of your pet, not because of you. You're not worthy, your pet might be worthy. You should feed them first. So that's just an interesting concept that's taken from Psalms that's mentioned in Tehillim. Okay, so we've fed our pets. Let's talk about some other things about food. Some of this will only apply to food that we eat later in a meal, like we're going to mention now, but once we're talking about food, we're going to talk about all aspects of food, even if though some of it is not chronological in nature, because again, having a whole meal we would do later in the day when we've done our prayers. Let's talk about one thing we do when we talk about meals, and that is washing of the hands. It's different than the washing of the hands we mentioned last week. Last week we mentioned washing of the hands. We were referring to the ritual washing when you start your day. The way that was done, if you remember, was that you pour it first on your right hand, then your left hand, right hand, left hand, right, left hand, or if you're lefty the other way, as we mentioned, but you do alternating. When you do washing for bread, you pour it 3 times on the right and 3 times on the left. I want to mention there are different customs. Some people do 2 times and 2 times. But many people do 3 times and 3 times. I'm going to talk about the meaning of this and why. But this is different than the washing we do in the morning. This is a different type of washing. It's for different reasons. The washing we do in the morning, as we mentioned last time, had to remind us of the priests who began their day in the Holy Temple with washing of the hands. It has to do with the fact that you become spiritually impure, contaminated, because sleep is 1/60th of death, we mentioned. Other reasons. This has to do with something else, which we'll get to in a moment. We'll talk about the reasons soon. But before we eat bread, we have a ritual washing of the hands. We'll talk about the meaning of that. 3 times on the right, 3 times on the left. If you're a lefty, 3 times on the left, then 3 times on the right. Okay, this is one of those cases where if you're a lefty, it would be the other way around. Okay, I'm just going to stop for a moment and take any questions. If anyone has any questions, I've unmuted this. If you have a question, if you have something you want to ask, I'm just going to make a little stop here. If not, we'll go on.
I just got mixed up with the blessing before the food for the hand washing. Did you say we still start with the right, or you start?
So again, if you're washing for bread,
Yeah,
or for the early morning washing, whatever hand is your more dominant hand. If you're righty, it's the right. If you're lefty, it's the left.
So
that's the one that goes first.
So that's okay. I just got mixed up. Thank you.
That's the way it goes with that. I mentioned last time that it's interesting that in Jewish code of law, it speaks about right and left. Sometimes it's the right no matter what, even if you're a lefty, and many times it depends. It's really about your more dominant hand. When it says right hand, it means you're more dominant. Okay. Any other questions?
I was just wondering, is that a practical solution, or that thousands of years ago, did they really
let's
write
talk
that
about
down?
so let's get into that. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit more about the technicalities, and then talk about some of the reasons in which we might talk about hygiene and things like that. We'll get there in a moment. Okay, some more technicalities. One should not have anything on their hands when they wash their hands, which means that you should remove a ring if you can. If some people cannot, but if you can remove your rings, don't lose them, please. But you set them aside. You do your washing your hands without your rings on. It should be done in like near where you're going to have, as near as possible, is where you're going to eat your bread. There is a blessing that's made and it's probably in one of the sheets that you got via email on the PDF. We raise our hands up slightly after we wash them, and we make this blessing. And then, of course, we would partake of the bread. It is customary, which we'll talk about soon, the reason for that. We'll get there later, to dip the bread into salt, a little bit of salt. This is done not only on Shabbat, even during the week. You should always, when you eat bread, the first piece of bread that you eat, not all of it, the first piece of bread you eat, you should dip it in salt. Okay, let's talk about reasons. What is behind this reason? What are the reasons? First, I'm going to tell you the technical reason given in the Jewish Code of Law. There are many levels, but I'm going to give you the basic, first of all, the basic reason. If you look in the Jewish Code of Law, why do we do this? This is the reason. In ancient times, we're talking about temple times. In temple times, a priest, a Kohen, many times his food would come from teruma, which were certain tithes that were given. And the rule was that their hands had to be ritually pure, had to be ritually cleansed before they would eat any of this tithes. And the vast majority of tithes were found in bread, in wheat, had to do with wheat and bread. And therefore, it became custom for the Kohanim to wash their hands before they ate bread. This was instituted, I believe, by King Solomon. Some of you have heard of King Solomon. This is one of the things that I believe that it was him and his court that they instituted, that the Kohanim should wash their hands. In order to make it easier for the Kohanim, and that they shouldn't be singled out in a sense, and also just to make it where everyone just does, it's just habit and everyone just does it, they instituted that all Jews should do it, even if you're not a priest. And it was decided that even though the temple was destroyed and we no longer bring these tithes, but being that one of the temple, there is this concept of a future, a brighter future. One day this may be necessary. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Yep. Okay. One day it may be necessary to do this again. So in order that we shouldn't forget this ritual, even though it's not really applicable today anymore, we continue to do it as Jewish custom. That is the technical reason. Again, if someone asks you, what's the technical reason for the hand washing? It had to do with ancient temple times, the tithes that were found in the wheat that they made the bread from. The priests had to have their hands had to be ritually pure, and therefore, and then they instituted that all Jews should do it the same way, not to single out the priests, and we still do it till today. That is the technical reason. With many Jewish laws, there are, as we mentioned last time, side benefits, right? Where we don't know all of God's intentions or all of the reasons behind things, but there is no question that washing your hands before you eat, which Jewish people, again, were doing 2,000 years ago, is a very smart, good thing to do. As we're learning today, how significant and important hand washing is and how important it is for hygiene, for health. So there is definitely that aspect that before you sit down to eat something, you don't know where your hands have been. You want your hands to be clean. That's a side benefit, but there's also a spiritual concept here. And I want to spend a little bit more time on the spiritual concept. What is the spiritual concept? The spiritual concept is that eating food in the Zohar, it says, is a battle. Eating food is a battle. Now, and washing the hands prepares us for the battle. What's the battle? Well, first of all, a lot of us know that for a lot of us that maybe shouldn't be eating as much or eating less. We know that battle. It's the battle of having a little bit more discipline and having a little bit more control. So we see physically there's a battle, but this is an expression of a deeper spiritual battle. What's the battle? Eating can be done in one of two ways. Eating can be a very self-oriented, animalistic, biological behavior. In other words, I'm hungry, that looks good, I want it, I'm going to have it. Or it can be a little bit more refined, it can be a little bit more godly, in the sense that I need to be healthy, I need to eat food that will give me nutrition, to give me the energy I need to fulfill my purpose here in this world, to serve God and do what I need to do, to be healthy and to do what I need to do. So in other words, every time we eat, we can either be eating from the animal soul perspective, which is more biological, self-oriented. It's not evil. It's the same reason your dog eats and your pet eats, because it's hungry and it needs to eat. Nothing evil about it, but it's, again, only basically about the self and about our biological needs. Or there is something deeper here. There's a God that put me here in this world, that gave me food so I can be sustained, and he wants me to be healthy, he wants me to have the nutrition, and I need that nutrition, I need that the nutrients and the food in order to be healthy, in order to serve God. It's two different ways of eating. That's why it says eating is a battle. It's the battle. Every time you eat, there's a battle going on between the animal soul and the godly soul. In the Zohar, interesting, in the Kabbalah, in the Zohar, it says that when you eat, you need to eat with a sword. Now, he doesn't mean a literal sword. You don't want to be showing up to the dining room table with a sword. That might scare off some people. What it means is, it's a euphemism. It's a symbol that you need to be ready for war. The war is this act going to be purely animalistic, purely self-oriented, or is this going to have some godly meaning? In fact, there's a fascinating interpretation of the story of Adam and Eve that says that this was actually the very first battle that mankind faced. Well, first of all, we know the very first thing was about eating, right? Eating from the tree. So we right away see eating is where all the struggle of mankind begins with eating. Anyone who thinks that eating is no big deal, that was the very first struggle, had to do with eating. What fruit to eat, what fruit not to eat. But according to one interpretation in the Torah, a fascinating interpretation, it says, when God says there's the tree of life, or all the trees in the tree of life, and there's the tree of knowledge, life is spiritual life, godly life, and knowledge is self-awareness, knowledge of self, being self-aware. And when God said what tree to eat from, he wasn't talking about different trees. He was really talking about different mindsets. You can either eat with the mindset of the tree of life, which means I eat for God, I eat for altruistic purposes, I eat for meaningful purposes, or it can be tree of knowledge eating. Tree of knowledge eating means I'm aware of myself, my needs, my desires, and what I want. And so really what God was saying to Adam and Eve, according to this particular interpretation, was you have to choose, is your eating going to be godly or animalistic? Is it going to be about yourself, or is it going to be about God? And really, in many ways, it sets a tone, because if we can learn to eat, which is something that is such a need that we have so often, right? Where we eat multiple times a day, and it's something where we're very drawn to it, and we have these instincts, very strong instincts and very strong desires. If we can learn to somehow be a little bit more godly in our eating, then of course this spills over to other aspects of our life. So it really sets the tone. Interesting that when you go to war, the word for war, milchama or lochem means to fight, has the same basic letters as another word, lochem. Does anyone hear a new word in the word lochem? Tell me if you speak up, unmute yourself if you.
Lechem.
Lechem, interesting. Lechem means bread, right? Like we say, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Hamotzi lechem. Lechem means bread. The word for bread, which is bread is the symbol for sustenance, it's the word we use, has the same letters that basically make up lochem, to battle, because eating is a battle. It's not only a battle for all of us in discipline and not eating too much, but it's a spiritual battle. It's a spiritual battle between the godly soul and the animal soul. And by the way, if we learn to eat more for godly reasons, it's easier to be more disciplined about what we eat, because if it's not about self and it's not about just my biological needs and my desires, but I'm doing this as a godly act, then I would say, okay, how much do I need to be healthy? How much nutrition do I need just to give me the energy I need? What is a healthy way to eat? And it's a little bit more easier to get in that mindset. So on a deeper level, washing the hands is purifying ourselves to be ready to eat from a more spiritual perspective. Remember, water is purifying. We're purifying ourselves in preparation to eat from a more spiritual perspective. First of all, also gives us pause, right? When you see food, what's your first reaction? Grab it, put it in your mouth. But if you can't grab it and put it in your mouth, you got to go wash your hands, make a blessing. You get a few moments of pause. Those few moments of pause might make you think once, hold on a second, before I just like react and dive at this food, maybe I could be mindful for a moment and think about what is about to take place. Why am I doing this? How can I make this more spiritual? How can I make this more godly? So there is also that pause that it gives us. And again, it's about purifying ourselves. Water also represents the Torah. Torah is compared to water. Torah, it gives us clarity and the knowledge to be able to eat in a more meaningful way. So again, when we talk about, there are many different levels to this concept of washing and the reasons for washing, but this is these are some. This is one of the deeper reasons. Again, the concept of purifying ourselves to eat from a more holy perspective. Okay, we'll take any questions if anyone has any questions, and then we'll continue here on from here. Okay, let's talk about another concept, and that is that before we eat bread, we will wash our hands. Another thing is that before we eat any food, we try to make at least, we make a blessing. The blessing is not a long blessing. It's a one-liner. It takes about 3 seconds to say. It could take more, but it's about a 3-second blessing, usually about 5 to 7 words. A blessing where thanking God for the food before we eat any food. So before we eat bread, we say hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Before we eat fruit from the tree, we make, and these are all on the papers that we sent out on the PDF, borei prio eitz. Before we eat something from the ground, it's borei pri adam, vegetables from the ground, borei pri adama. And most of we fish, meat, and cheeses and other things that don't fall into one of those categories, we will make on it a shahakol. And again, bread is hamotzi, and things that are not bread but made from grains, 5 different grains, we say on those things mizonot. I'm not going to get into the technicalities. This is not a class to get into the technicalities of it. Different foods have different blessings. Some straightforward, fruits, vegetables. Some of it gets a little complicated. Is strawberry a fruit or a vegetable? What defines vegetable? What defines fruit? A lot of interesting discussions. You can find a lot of resources online that if you want to know what's the blessing on a particular thing, they can give you those blessings. You can ask I believe even Siri can help you find those blessings if you need. So I'm not going to get into that, but I want to talk about the meaning here as well. First of all, again, as we just mentioned, pause. You're about to eat something. Before you just react biologically, the pause. It's a pause. It's just, give me a moment. Let me be mindful for a moment. And in that moment, it allows me to collect myself and to think about what I'm about to do. So that's number one. Number two is we're told this is an act of asking permission. What do we mean by asking permission? What we're saying is that really all this food, yes, I went to the grocery store and paid for it, or had, now a lot of people have Instacart and shipped and all other ways you can get Amazon sending your food to your house, safer ways to get your food to your house. Whatever it may be, that's true. And it went on my credit card. And at the end of the month, I'm going to pay that credit card bill. But ultimately, everything belongs to God. Everything's a blessing. And it's a way of asking permission, saying, please, God, is it okay if I have your food? Before you take something from someone else, you ask. It's asking permission. It's being polite. And also, it's a matter of gratitude, being thankful. So we take a moment, and it's, again, another act, small thing. You say, well, it's just eating food. Yes, but you have a few moments when you eat food before you eat it to express that you are thankful, and again, there's a particular thanks that you have for each thing. So that is another concept. When we talk about food, we've talked so far about washing our hands. We've talked about the concept of the battle that's taking place, and we've talked about blessings in the food. Other things regarding eating food in our homes. Number one, if possible, we should try to have our meals have some kind of meaningful discussion in the meal. So in other words, whether for some people that might be reading something spiritual or discussing something meaningful, that it shouldn't just be, I'm hungry. You have pictures of people pull their chairs straight up to the fridge, put their head up to the shelf and just move the food, slide the food in. It should be more dignified, sitting at a table. We maybe, if we're alone, maybe we should have something to read while we're having the meal, something meaningful, or if it's someone else in a discussion, doesn't mean the whole meal has to be a meaningful discussion, but we should dedicate a few moments to some kind of concept that we can have. Just give me one moment. Sorry about that. Okay. So another thing, again, so we want to have a meaningful discussion when we're at the table, if possible. We should include some meaning. Another thing that we do at the table is that we, as we mentioned earlier, is we have salt at the table. We have a little bit of salt at the table. And the first piece of bread, this is for eating bread, if we can have bread, first piece of bread should be dipped in the salt. The meaning behind this is that in ancient temple times on the altar, they would have salt with every single sacrifice, and the salt, so when we have it at our table, it reminds us that our table is not just a place of consumption of food, it's an altar in the sense that this is a place of service of God. When we eat, we are also serving God. We're not just fulfilling our biological needs, we're serving God. It's part of the service of God, like the altar where they serve God. So we have the salt to remind us of that. On a deeper spiritual meaning, salt is, as we've mentioned before, very enigmatic. On the one hand, when it is for itself, when it's just salt for itself, it is very unuseful in the sense that if you take a big spoonful of salt and try to eat it, it's not very pleasant. But a little bit of salt spread on other foods brings out the flavor that's inherent in those foods. And that is what we're told symbolically when we're about to eat. We should think about how our lives are led. If we lead our lives just for ourselves, for our own animalistic biological needs, we are like salt just for itself. It's bitter. But if we are salt in the sense that we're here to serve, to share, to give, to make a difference, to bring out the flavors in others, then that's something that's very, very valuable. And so there is a concept, of course, of that the salt reminds us of, it sets a tone for how we want our how we want to eat and approach really everything in our life from the perspective of salt. Another concept another concept to keep in mind is that there are some various traditions in ancient Judaism about being healthy when you eat. Some things that it mentions in the Jewish code of law are you should not talk with food in your mouth. First of all, it's not polite, but also it's not healthy because it's a choking hazard. So Judaism says in Jewish code of law, interesting, Jewish code of law based on Talmud teachings 2,000 years ago, do not talk while you have food in your mouth. So that's number one. Number two, another saying from the Jewish code of law, if you eat slowly, you'll live a long life. Interesting. And it's medically been shown that it's very important to chew your food very well and to eat at a slower pace than probably most of us do. Another thing in Jewish code of law, it says don't eat unless you're hungry. I guess the people who wrote this were not living through a pandemic, but they did write that you should not eat unless you're hungry. And then it also says that a person should not eat to the point of being full. It says a person should, Jewish code of law says a person should be 3/4 to the point of satiation. That's there should be 75%, where you kind of feel 75% satiated. So that is some interesting health insights from ancient Jewish law. Another one or two concepts here. There's a lot of interesting tradition of respecting food. What do I mean by respecting food? Food is a gift from God. It's a gift that's given to us, and we're not to in any way do anything to show disrespect to this gift. Someone gives you a gift, you take care of it. It is a wonderful miracle that it gives us the nutrition we need. And so number one in Jewish law, it says one should never throw food. Food should never be thrown. If it says if you see food on the floor, you should pick it up. You shouldn't just leave it. Food should not be left. Food should be picked up. And don't do anything to food that would make it inedible. In other words, do something that would render it inedible. We don't want to waste food. And even, especially it says about bread, if you're not going to eat the bread, you should at least feed it to the birds. And feed it to the animals or feed it to the birds. But if possible, not to throw it out. We don't want to waste it. So even sometimes people use food as decorations, decorative. And Jewish code also says one has to be careful with that. If you're going to render it inedible, and if you're going to use food in such a way that because you're using it for decoration, it's going to be inedible, Judaism would say that's not the best thing to do because we don't want to waste this gift of nutrition that God has given us. So when our mothers told us, there are people starving in other parts of the world, and what do you do with that food? Our Jewish mothers told us that it wasn't just a Jewish mother sentiment. It has basis in Jewish law. Food is something that should not be wasted and should not in any way be treated with disrespect. If you see food on the floor, you're supposed to pick it up and so on and so forth. If it's not clean, you can't eat it, of course, but we should not treat it without respect because it is something that is a gift that's given to us from God. Finally, and the last piece of this, of course, is the concept of a grace after meals, that one should say an after blessing. There are different versions of the after blessing. Depends what you ate. If you ate a full meal, you washed your hands and you had bread, one should do the full grace after meals. If it was just a snack, there's a much shorter version of it. You can much of this might be on your sheets, or you can find this in the prayer book. But what I want to talk about the grace after meals, first of all, interesting that the verse that is in the Torah that we learn it out from says, "You shall eat, and you shall be satisfied, and you shall bless God." So that's how we learn that after you eat, you should say thank you to God. So there is a very interesting commentary that says like this: when you eat, when you consume, and visavata, and then you want to be satisfied, what does that mean? A lot of people consume things in life and they're not satisfied. They're never satisfied. They always want more. They consume materialism. I'm not just talking about food. We're consumers of all sorts of materialism. We consume, but then we're not satisfied. It doesn't fill that hole. It doesn't make us satisfied. We want more. So the Judaism says, if you want to be satisfied, there's a trick. And what is the trick? Uveirachta, and you shall bless, thank God. If the more you are thankful, the more that you learn the habit of gratitude, learn the attitude of gratitude, and learn to be thankful for the things that you have, the more the more you're going to be satisfied and be thankful for what you have. If you take what you have for granted, it's never enough. But if you're thankful from the depth of your heart for what you have, whatever you have is enough. So the grace after meals is not just about being polite and being thankful to God. It is also about learning the art of being satisfied and happy with your lot, which is not easy because the nature of a human being is when you have 100, you want 200 if you want to. You ask anyone if they have enough. It's never enough. I always need more. There's something else. So learning to be satisfied with your lot is very important, and that comes through blessing. Just to give you some historical background to the Grace After Meals, the Grace After Meals has multiple paragraphs. Interesting to note, the first paragraph, which is the paragraph that many of us know from camps or schools that we all sing or our kids sing, that paragraph, who composed that paragraph? Does anyone know who composed that paragraph? Okay, interesting piece of trivia, Moses. We're told, our tradition says that Moses was the author of the first paragraph of the benching. The next two paragraphs were authored by Joshua. So Joshua, after he led the Jewish people into the land of Israel, it thanks God for the land. If you read it, it thanks God for the land. That was composed by Joshua. So it's interesting that, and then the next two paragraphs, the next paragraph, Rachem, that was composed by King Solomon, King David and King Solomon. So they composed that part. And then the last part, the Uvenei Yerushalayim, may Jerusalem be built, and the whole last large part of the Grace After Meals was written by the rabbis 2,000 years ago, after the time of the failed Bar Kokhba revolts. You know, anyone who knows some Jewish history knows that there was a revolt against the Romans. This is after the destruction of the Second Temple. It was a failed revolt. It was a very hard time for the Jewish people, a lot of oppression, a lot of torture, a very difficult time. There were miracles, and for those miracles, they made these blessings. There are also in these blessings, they pray for the rebuilding. But that was written by the rabbis 2,000 years ago. So actually, the Grace After Meals we have today is actually the sum total of a long history and it has evolved from the time of Moses to today, with all these different pieces that were added on throughout Jewish history. And of course, that's the Grace After Meals as we know it today. One does not have to do the whole thing. One can do one paragraph, one can do a part of it. Of course, the most important thing is the gratitude and being thankful and taking the time to say thank you to God for the blessings that we have. One interesting note, I don't know if I mentioned this last time or not. I think I may have mentioned it. I don't remember. A lot of Zooms. I'm confused with what I say on what Zoom. But it says that when you do make a blessing on food, this is before you eat the food, it says it's important that the food should be there already. It should be in front of you. And the reason being, the technical reason is that there should not be a separation between when you make the blessing, when you eat, and when you eat the food. There shouldn't be a separation between those two. And that's why we have this concept of making sure the food is in front of us. I'm not sure if you've heard me tell the story before, but I'll share it again with the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. He was once invited to the Prime Minister's home, 10 Downing Street, Prime Minister John Major at the time, and he was there for a state, the President of Israel. And the Prime Minister, in front of all the crowd, asked the rabbi to lead the crowd in a blessing for the food. The problem was, the rabbi said, and he was put in a very awkward position, they hadn't brought the food out yet. And in Jewish law, you can't make the blessing until you see the food. The food's got to be there because you don't want there to be a separation. And it was very awkward. You know, you've got the Prime Minister asking you to make a blessing, and you're kind of, what do you do? And he said that, thank God, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a bowl of grapes sitting on the side. And he says he was saved by the grape, and he made a blessing on the grape. And he ate one of the grapes. And later with the Prime Minister, said, you see, you Christians have a lot more. You're willing to make a blessing on food even before you see it. He says, for us Jews, we've been in exile a long time. We have experience. So when we see the food, we make the blessing. That's how it works for us. That was the way he explained that. But that is one also the technicality that when blessings of food, we make sure the food is in front of us as well. I'll take any questions at this time and see if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask. Yes, go ahead, Lisa.
Am I muted? Oh, okay.
No, you're good. You're good. We hear you.
I was reading and now I can't find it in there that it said like you're supposed to make a blessing, a separate blessing for like every category when you're eating. Is
Yeah, so
that
it depends what you're eating. There's food. This is the before blessing. The before blessing, if you're eating something, as I said, from the tree, it's ha'etz.
But if
Blessing
you're
from something.
but like if you're eating all of it, like say you're having a salad and it has fruit and vegetables, do you?
Okay, so what you do when something is all mixed together, and basically it's one big mix, is that you look at what's the most dominant thing in there. And
Okay.
whatever's the most dominant, and that's where Jewish law can get a little technical with all of this. It's not, again, we don't have to be perfection. We don't have to do it exactly all right. We learn, we grow, we do. The main thing is that we're learning, we're growing, and we're introducing more spiritual meaning in the things that we do at home. And especially when it comes to eating, because eating can be, again, very mundane. It could be very biological, or it can be meaningful. It could be spiritual, it could be meaningful. And we do it multiple times a day. So we might as well imbue it with meaning, spirituality, deeper purpose, and learning self-discipline in the sense of, is my life just about myself? Or even when I eat, I recognize I have a godly soul. I'm a human being. I'm not an animal. I'm not just a more developed animal. I'm a human being with a spirit, with a soul, with a meaningful, altruistic side to me. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating, for coming, and we'll be back on next
What
week.
time did it start today?
7:30 every week, same time. This class
Oh, I
starts
thought it was
7:30
8
p.m.
o'clock. Sorry.
Where does it say? I don't think it's.
8 o'clock last week.
I don't think so. 7:30 every week. This is the 7:30 class. We have
Okay.
there's a lot of Zooms. It's hard to keep up. But
But
this
now
one is yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't know we were done. Can I ask
Yeah,
you
go
a
ahead.
question? Which,
Sure.
so I've been, going through the prayers from last week, and it mentioned a couple that were not in the handout. Is this from a specific prayer book?
No, in other words, what they did with the PDFs is that they took out the most vital and most important ones. It's not a full prayer book. They're saying here, let's give you a glimpse of the most important blessings to make. There are more that if you open the prayer book, you can read more of the blessings. What they wanted to do is highlight some of the main ones.
But I know, but is there like which prayer book? I mean, I have a bunch, but I can't hear you.
I assume they took it from the Chabad prayer book.
Okay, the specific, okay.
Yeah, that's where they took it from. They didn't include all the prayers. They put out what they believed was the most vital prayers,
Right.
in there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we'll call it a night. Thank you everyone for participating, and we'll see everyone soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.